My name is John Jowett. I started life as a theoretical physicist, but when I came to CERN I transformed myself into an accelerator physicist. I come from Scotland originally, but I've been living most of my life actually around CERN. Originally I was studying at Edinburgh University, and just before the last year it was suggested to me by one of my teachers, Peter Higgs, whose name later became quite well known, that I applied to the CERN summer student program, and I did that and came in 1975 for a very exciting program. At the time there were lectures from great physicists like Victor Weisskopf, which I remember still now, so that was a great experience. A few years later, after finishing my PhD, I saw a job advertised for somebody rather like me at CERN. I sent off an application. I heard nothing for quite a long time. Then I suddenly got an invitation to come to CERN for an interview, which I did, and sometime later I got the job. So in September 1980 I came to CERN working in what was called the theory group of the ISR division, as it then was. I never worked on the ISR, the first Hadron Collider at CERN myself, but the people I was with had been doing so, but the ISR was coming to the end of its life, and they were preparing a new project called LEP, the Large Electron Positron Collider, which had not yet been approved, but it was hoped to build it at CERN in the coming years. So I worked on that, on some rather special features of it, and learned the trade of an accelerator physicist on the job, because at the time there were no schools and few ways to learn about it, not many textbooks either. And so I quickly developed a speciality in studying in the physics of electron-positron beams. A few years later, in 1983, the LEP project was approved, and the excavation of the tunnel began in 1985, if I remember correctly. That tunnel, of course, now houses the Large Hadron Collider. A few years later, in 1989, we had the first beams in LEP. That was an exciting time to watch the preparation for first collisions, getting this huge new machine working. I must admit I was quite worried about whether it would work or not at the time, but it did. So then LEP ran then from 1989 to 2000. Going back a little bit perhaps, in 1983 we took a break from studying LEP, which had just been approved and was in some sense in the bag, although there was a lot of work to be done, to study another future project called the Large Hadron Collider. And I think I was the youngest person on the feasibility study team. And we wrote the first report for the LHC in 1983-84. At the time, it struck me as working on something that was very, very far in the future and really a bit speculative. I mention that because I think it's important for young people nowadays to realize that we felt the same as they might feel now about the FCC. Going back to LEP, I worked on a number of aspects of LEP. One was a way to increase the number of collisions, the luminosity of the first phase of LEP at the Z boson collision energy, by increasing the number of particle bunches in the machine, a high luminosity upgrade as it was called. Then I gradually moved over to working on the LHC in the later years of LEP. One interesting task I had was to be the secretary of the External Machine Advisory Committee for the LHC, where we had to get input from people who worked at other Hadron Colliders and Hadron Colliders that were never built, such as the SSC in the United States. Perhaps the most interesting job I got in my career came in 2003, when we were about to write the definitive design report for the LHC. I was asked to take on the subject of so-called heavy ion collisions in the LHC, that is, the collisions of heavy nuclei. As you know, the LHC spends most of its time colliding protons, but there is a second very important program where the LHC collides the nuclei of very heavy atoms, lead in particular. The heavy ion program emerged in the early 1990s with the coming together of the ALICE experiment and its collaboration, and also the growing interest of the CMS and ATLAS experiments in collisions of nuclei. In those collisions we study not so much the fundamental forces and particles which exist, but their behaviour on a larger scale, their collective behaviour, where you have a lot of hadronic matter, nuclear matter, condensed into a very small volume at tremendous temperatures and pressures, and new physics, collective behaviour physics emerges in those collisions. And it's very important because we believe that the early universe took the form of this quark gluon plasma in its first microseconds of existence. So it helps to understand the early universe and other extreme situations, and has been a very fruitful program. So in 2003 I took on the study of that and the preparation of commissioning the LHC for that mode of operation in 2010 for the first time. It worked better than expected by some, and it became a regular feature of the LHC with a month of those collisions at the end of every operating year. A month, of course, seemed like a very tight time frame for commissioning a hadron collider in a new mode of operation. But thanks to the quality of the LHC design and the reproducibility of its hardware, and to some extent the preparation in the proton collision mode, this was actually possible. And we could commission the new operation mode in a few days and produce luminosity physics production for most of that 1 month period each time. And then in later years we did other things, for example colliding protons against lead, which was an unforeseen mode of operation and also worked very well. It required some new implementations in the LHC, and later the collision of xenon beams. Next year the LHC will also collide oxygen and proton-oxygen beams. So it's turned out to be a very interesting program, and all the experiments, not only the specialist experiment ALICE, have become interested in it. Since I had to retire from my CERN job, I've remained associated with CERN. I was asked to join the ALICE experiment, which I had been closely associated with for the heavy ion collisions. Before then, I continue as a user at CERN and working to some extent with my former colleagues in the beams department and with new colleagues in the ALICE experiment on various topics. Working at CERN has had an enormous impact on my life. It has been my life to a very large extent. It was my first real job after graduating with my PhD, and I've stayed at CERN essentially all the time since then. It of course involved for me and my wife moving to another country, bringing up our family here, and so on, in a different environment than I might have lived in otherwise. Well, a big part of working at CERN all these years has been the people that I've had the privilege of working with. At the start, in the early 1980s, that was very important because you had to learn. I had to learn from them, and I was lucky to work with some very well-known figures in accelerator physics: Albert Hofmann, Eberhard Kyle, Kurt Hubner, people like that. And then again, many others over the years. I became aware of the fact that the success of CERN and its ability to carry through these huge projects depends very much on having a very broad-based expertise, which takes a long time to build up in many domains, not only physics, from particle physics, theory, experimental physics, accelerator physics, but also many branches of technology that are required to build the machines: the magnet technology, radio frequency accelerator technology, vacuum, and many other things, computing of course. and I got to know many people and developed a great respect for them. When I first came to CERN in the accelerator sector, there were not many students present, except for the occasional summer students. We didn't have PhD students then. That's something that came some years later, and it was always a great privilege for me, I think, to work together with some excellent students for their PhDs awarded by various universities. Some of those students later went on to careers in accelerator physics at CERN and other labs, and in other domains as well. So that was very rewarding and enjoyable too. Collaborating with people, particularly in the operation of colliders like LEP and the LHC and the control room, was a particularly good moment, because there you met a lot of people and collaborated with them in a very direct, very intense way, often in the middle of the night. And that was always a great experience, especially as it often led to new developments, colliding beams at a new energy or a new kind of beams, or seeing that some new development in the accelerators did work. That was always extremely rewarding. So I think it's very important that CERN preserves this body of expertise that it has, expertise, knowledge that it's developed over many years. This is difficult to recreate. It's a precious asset. It has allowed CERN over the years to go from one project to the next successfully, and I'm sure it will do so in future. Well, I think one has to go back to the fundamental reason for CERN's existence, which is to advance knowledge of the universe and matter at its most basic level, on the smallest scales, the properties of matter, the forces that create matter and govern its interactions, and therefore ultimately everything else. This is a fundamental value that I think doesn't need any justification. I think anybody can appreciate that, and thanks, I think, to the CERN's outreach efforts in recent years and elsewhere, more and more of the general public do appreciate this. Of course, there are many valuable spin-offs, so-called. The economic benefits of CERN are very important as well. Technologies developed at CERN have become extremely important in medicine, industry, other forms of research in science. The use of particle accelerators, especially which is my speciality, they're applied. Most of the particle accelerators are applied to other purposes than high energy physics. So that speaks for itself, I think. Well, CERN, as we're celebrating this year, has been around for a long time already. I think it will continue to be here for a long time to come. I hope that CERN will continue to thrive, that future projects will be studied and approved. In the past, there were always people who said, we cannot possibly build a larger machine than this last one. But that was said about LEP, but LEP was built and the LHC was built, and they work and they're a success. And they cost much less than you would have expected by scaling up from the technologies of decades ago. So while the costs of large projects are high, they're spread out over many years and many countries, and the value that they generate far exceeds the outlay, and this has been demonstrated many times in the past. This, I think, will continue to hold in the future. What's important for CERN is to continue to educate people. It does that for its own purposes of maintaining its own expertise, passing it on. If that becomes more difficult as the timescales stretch out, of course, because the people who may be commissioning the future circular collider in the 2040s may not have worked on commissioning the last collider, the LHC, in the early 2010s. So they have to learn how it was done, how all the technologies were applied. That knowledge has to be maintained, so it's important that CERN can maintain this. CERN makes big efforts in education, not only for that reason, but also because people trained at CERN make extremely valuable contributions elsewhere in society. And of course the alumni network promotes this. That's very valuable not only for CERN but for society at large. People learn about CERN, former CERN staff or people who work temporarily at CERN or studied at CERN can pass on their knowledge elsewhere and contribute in many ways in many industries and fields of human endeavour.